Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 109, Behind the Canonical Screen.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street Irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, here we are once again. Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where, you guessed it, it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And once again, we are here to bring you some exciting news. Well, not news as much as it is an interview with two very erudite and astute women of the Sherlockian world. I'm going about this solo this time. Burt had some other activities planned over Thanksgiving weekend. I had some other activities planned over Thanksgiving weekend, so we just split the duties, and here we are. So, before we begin, we'd like to bid you this message from one of our sponsors.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex is moving towards the goal of 100% employment. That's why you need to visit wessexpress.com, where your purchases help us restore the guilds of bakers, brewers, butchers, and blacksmiths that served us well for centuries. There you can buy the Sherlock Holmes Reference Library, the original exhaustively annotated 10-volume edition of the Sherlock Holmes stories by Edgar Award winner Leslie S. Klinger, the most complete collection of Sherlockian scholarship and commentary ever assembled, bursting with scholarly annotations and sturdy, signature-sewn softcover bindings. These are the days when the sun pours gold into the air and flecks of light float in shafts through waving branches. On this autumn afternoon, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
And as we mentioned, we'll be joined this episode by two editors of a book called Sherlock Holmes, Behind the Canonical Screen. Before we get to each of them, we'll give you an intro to them. We'd like to start by reading the preface of this volume. The book is Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen, papers from the conference held at the UCLA School for Theater, Film, and Television. This was a BSI excursion that was held in late August and early September 2012, where 100 or so attendees went out to Los Angeles and attended this 3-day seminar, conference, and heard from all kinds of people. And the preface was written by Michael Keene and Leslie Klinger, who are editors of the BSI Press. Described by Michael Whalen, who conceived the idea as, quote, the popular culture equivalent of the grand game versus the canon, end quote, the third Baker Street Irregulars officially sponsored conference was special in a number of ways. This was the first event held on the west coast of the United States, and while the previous two took place in canonical locations, Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, the setting of the events depicted in the Valley of Fear, and Salt Lake City, the center of the Mormon Church and the focal point of A Study in Scarlet, this event transcended a single story and endeavored to emphasize the full range of Sherlockian cinema. Also, it was a unique collaboration between the Baker Street Irregulars and the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. In the year in which Guinness World Records declared Sherlock Holmes to be the most often filmed human character, it was certainly appropriate to visit the epicenter of the film universe, Hollywood. Although there's no record of Holmes ever traveling to Tinseltown, Arthur Conan Doyle did so in 1923. By then, Holmes had been portrayed on film almost 100 times, mostly by English studios. However, with the advent of sound, a major Hollywood studio began the first of many American productions. Today, according to Guinness, Holmes has been depicted on the screen 254 times by more than 75 different actors. Formerly titled Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen, the conference was held from Friday, August 31st through Sunday, September 2nd, 2012, on UCLA's beautiful Westwood campus. The antithesis of a typical film festival, it was developed as an academic event examining the films of Sherlock Holmes and the craft of creating them. Though several films and numerous film clips were shown, the conference focused on cinematic scholarship. Some 25 presenters covered a wide range of topics, from Holmes in cartoon form to the earliest versions of Holmes on the screen in England and in the United States and around the world. While it's impossible to incorporate this volume of all the stunning visual aspects of the conference, including in particular the brilliant display of costuming presented by Oscar-nominated costume designer Dr. Deborah Nadoolman, the material that follows should give a reader a sense of delights of the conference. For those who attended, the papers that follow provide a deeper look into topics that seem to fly by in the 2-day period of the conference. For those unable to attend, the materials offer an opportunity to recreate this once-in-a-lifetime experience. While the discovery in 2014 of the lost William Gillette film of the play Sherlock Holmes may have garnered more publicity, the BSI UCLA Film Conference will go down in memory as a watershed in the study of Holmes on screen. Now, the presenters and the tireless editors of this volume have produced this essential resource for the student of the Sherlockian film and history of cinema. We hope that you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed producing the conference. Well, on this show, we are fortunate enough to have both editors of this volume with us, including Lyndsay Faye, BSI, Kitty Winter. Lyndsay is the internationally best-selling author of the Edgar Award-nominated Timothy Wilde trilogy, as well as critically acclaimed pastiche Dust and Shadow, an account of the Ripper killings by Dr. John H. Watson. She's a guest writer for the Eisner Award-nominated comic Watson and Holmes, has written numerous short stories for Sherlockian anthologies, as well as the Strand magazine. And The Case of Colonel Warburton's Madness was selected by Otto Penzler and Lee Child for Best American Mystery Stories 2010. An adventuress of Sherlock Holmes, a Baker Street babe, and a curious collector, Ms. Faye is also a proud volunteer mentor for Girls Right Now and a director-at-large for Mystery Writers of America. Her work has been translated into 14 languages, and The Gods of Gotham was honored by the American Library Association for Best Historical Fiction. She lives in Queens with her husband and cats. Lyndsay, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm much better now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I should say welcome back to the show. Good to have you here.
Oh, yes. Yes. Last time I was here, I was failing to ask my questions or my answers in the form of a question.
Oh, you remember.
On
right.
Sherlockian Jeopardy. It went so well.
And Ashley D. Polasek, Ph.D., FRSA, is an internationally recognized expert in the study of Sherlock Holmes adaptations. Both her MA thesis and doctoral dissertation interrogated the subject of Holmes on screen, and she's published several academic articles in leading journals and presented numerous papers exploring various aspects of Sherlockian film and television throughout the United States, United Kingdom, and Europe. As a frequent reviewer for Oxford UP's Adaptation and a member of both the Association of Adaptation Studies and the Literature Film Association, she's proud to be a point of contact for scholars seeking to publish about Holmes's screen afterlives. She's a fellow of the Center for Adaptations at De Montfort University and is a member of both the Baker Street Babes and the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes. She lives in South Carolina with her Wheaton Terrier Jekyll and her husband, Mr. Hyde.
Hi, Scott.
So as Lyndsay intimated, you were both here on episode 70, Sherlockian Jeopardy, when I don't know what on God's green earth possessed us to do this, to try a full-fledged game show on an audio program for well over, I don't know, an hour and a half.
It was pretty awesome.
It was intense. It was intense. And you were real sports to have done it with us. But we learned our lesson. We'll never do it again.
What a shame.
Hey,
I haven't had an excuse to drink whiskey like that in years.
Well, come on. BSI weekend's coming up.
You're right. That was absolutely a lie. I drink whiskey like that.
There we go. Well, we're not here to talk about drinking or the BSI weekend. We're here to talk about something else related to the BSI, and that is this marvelous book that the two of you have co-edited called Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen, Papers from the Conference held at the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television from August 31st to September 2nd, 2012. It's available for sale on the BakerStreetJournal.com website, put out by the BSI Press. So this is, I mean, it's a marvelous book. A couple of dozen essays in here, but this conference, I unfortunately was not able to get out to Los Angeles to attend this conference. Were both of you there on the ground for this one?
Yes. Yeah, we were both there. We both presented papers, and we ended up on the same panel because, sort of, at least in a kind of superficial way, there was a thread that connected our topics.
Yes, I presented a little bit of a discussion on Irene Adler, her canonical incarnation, and then her Robert Downey Jr. incarnation, which was Rachel McAdams, of course, and then her Laura Pulver BBC Sherlock incarnation. And I ended up making the argument that I think the Doylean canonical version is probably the most badass of any of them.
Hello.
So hello. Yes, the woman. So, then following that, Ashley did a fascinating presentation on, what she is actually very well studied in. You did, study in Terror and Murder by Decree, correct?
Yes. So my paper, basically went off of what I found, or what I consider to be rather an interesting idea, which is that it's well nigh impossible to find two adaptations that actually meet two different sets of criteria. One is that they're original screenplays, so they're not adapted from the canon, so that the people who are making the film can basically have free reign with what they want the characters to say and do and the situations they want them in. And at the same time, for two films like that, to actually have the same set of ancillary characters. So I did.
So the Ripper in this case specifically.
Right. Well, particularly his victims, who are all women. And so, having these two films where the same set of women are portrayed in both films, but both represent this kind of directorial and writer freedom and so forth, was very unusual. So I wanted to compare how women are portrayed and Sherlock Holmes's sort of feelings toward women, how he's represented interacting with women in these films that are roughly bracket the second wave feminist movement. So Study in Terror is 1965, just a couple years after Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique, and Murder by Decree is 1979, kind of when the second wave feminist movement is winding down. And as it turns out, there's a huge amount of difference between the two films and the way these women are portrayed on screen and how Holmes interacts with them.
Yes, he's much more urbane and sort of nonchalant and almost in some cases a little bit supercilious about them. I would argue in A Study in Terror.
He doesn't even go in to look at the crime scene for Mary Kelly.
Wow.
And then the very different reaction with Christopher Plummer, right?
Yeah, in Murder by Decree, I mean, he tries to assault a doctor and then bursts into tears, more or less. So he's willing to willing to undermine or tear down the empire to ensure the safety and security of these abject women. So, big difference.
Wow.
So then after we had both done these presentations, we had a joint Q&A, and all of those videos are available on YouTube. If you would like to see our initial presentations, you can Google my name, you can Google Ashley's name, and you can quite easily find them on the YouTubes, including the Q&A that we did after the fact, if you would like to see it verbatim.
We will dig up that link and share it with our listeners.
Fantastic.
And we should mention that there are contributions from about 24 authors and participants, I should say authors and presenters from the conference that are included in this volume, Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen. Thinking of, not necessarily of Irene Adler or of Jack the Ripper, but of the feminist angle, both of you must have felt complete vindication when Sherlock Holmes, The Abominable Bride came out in January of 2014, as there was a kind of an underlying theme there with, I think it was with the suffragettes and kind of a feminist theme there. Was that maybe foreshadowing that was happening at the conference?
The conference, actually, I should speak on a chronological level, and say that, the conference and the book, there was a lot of time in the interim, between when the conference came out and when, say, The Abominable Bride came out. And The Abominable Bride had, certainly a lot of, suffragette interests and some of it worked for feminists and some of it maybe didn't work quite as effectively, but there are a lot of strong female characters in BBC Sherlock, and everybody appreciates that, I think. But with Behind the Canonical Screen, there was a period of a couple of years where it was, I think, the definite considered strong intention of Mr. Leslie Klinger and Mr. Michael Keane to put together a book version of what had happened to that conference and, just to sort of assemble that for the BSI Press. But then Free Sherlock came along, and I think that most of us can all say that we are very grateful that Free Sherlock did come along and completely derailed Les's time. But that book, the publication of the book version of Behind the Canonical Screen came out considerably after when the physical UCLA conference was. So, for instance, one of the real treats of having been at that conference was that we got to see CBS Elementary before it had ever debuted. So, Robert Doherty was there, and he was just, discussing the pilot episode with us, and he was like, "Hey, did you see that he keeps bees? Did you get the thing about the bees?" And we were like, "Yeah.
Got it, yes."
We definitely got the thing about the bees, but we
clever.
appreciate you having double checked. So it was, that was kind of adorable. And then, it was something that nobody had ever seen before, which was lovely.
Yeah.
And, Nicholas Meyer was there and John Landis was there, in conversation. And so a lot of those things, they actually happened considerably before, The Abominable Bride came out. But I think that you can take a feminist approach, or you can take any number of approaches if in terms of cultural criticism. You can take any number of approaches to things whenever you like. But this conference, it didn't necessarily foreshadow the things that the BBC were doing. The BBC were already, they were already working on,
of course,
on changing Irene Adler and changing ways that people understand Sherlock Holmes, and ways in which people understand John Watson as well.
Yeah.
So all of that was just sort of like organically happening, and then there was about a 2.5 year gap between when the conference happened and the book did.
Yeah. And another interesting thing that happened in that gap, because you've got Russ Merritt in here talking about the silence, particularly about the Isla Norwood silence. But of course, in between 2012 and now 2016 or 2015, when the book was first published, we had this wonderful, remarkable discovery of the 1916 William Gillette silent film that, has kind of overtaken everything in the silence, if you will.
It's so much fun.
And Russ was right there front and center. But when Russ gave his presentation at the conference this time around, were there any visuals? Was there any film footage to support his talk?
No.
I don't recall if there were any visuals. As Lyndsay kind of intimated, what we got, we had no notion that we were going to be responsible for putting the book together when the conference happened. So the idea of potentially saving people's visuals and things really was, it wasn't on our radar. So
it wasn't conceived of. We were just presenters.
Right. So
Gotcha.
I don't remember. It's very likely that, if anything, he may have had a PowerPoint, but I don't think he had any, he did any clips or anything. However, at the conference, there were various screenings.
Okay.
And as I recall, we screened Eileen Norwood's, I believe it was his Sign of Four, actually, that we screened, with, appropriate live music and so forth.
That was the one that was really talked about, though, because, it wasn't definitely the Gillette film. It was not in any state to be seen at that point.
No.
Well, at that point, it hadn't been rediscovered yet.
Right.
At the time of the conference, it hadn't been rediscovered. So that wasn't even part of the discussion, really. But as far as clips and so forth of other aspects of Sherlockian silent film, we did get the screening of the Eileen Norwood film, and
that was cool.
There are some of those that are available in the U.S., and there are some of those that, for various reasons, only exist in copies abroad and almost never see screening in the U.S. And I can't recall how we ended up with that particular film. Eileen Norwood did 47 Sherlock Holmes films. So
not a lot of them extant, though.
No, they're not all extant, but a lot of them are extant. But they're not a lot of them are available for viewing, even though they exist.
I see.
It's that they've not been transferred, or that they're sort of, they only exist where they're archived, and they may be archived at the BFI, the British Film Institute, or something like that. You can go to the archives and you can view them, but you can't, order a copy on Amazon
Right.
and view it in your home. There are only a couple that you can do that with, I think.
Russ,
It was amazing that. Oh, I'm so sorry. Scott,
I was
go
going
on.
to say Russ has so many connections. Being a film professor as he is, and being part of the annual San Francisco Silent Film Festival. He's got all sorts of connections, and I don't think either of you were available at the Chautauqua excursion just a few months ago, September of 2016. But Russ managed to get 3 Isla Norwood films over from the BFI, shown for the very first time in the United States, and for the very last time too, because of the way the rights work. So it was amazing that we got to see them when we did.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean,
For the
that
rest
must have been priceless.
It is.
Sorry?
It is.
That was a funny dance. Russ was my first real introduction to the Baker Street Irregulars, actually.
Oh, tell us about that.
The very first time that I went to the birthday weekend, I really had no idea what to expect. I had no reason to expect that anybody would kind of go out of their way, to talk to me or to be interested in me at all. I was just sort of, along for the ride, so to speak. And, I went on the Christopher Morley walk, which of course, is 2 degrees and outdoors. And,
Mr. Cox and Dory Nash, yes.
Yeah, and Russ was there, and he sort of adopted me on the walk, and kind of took me under his wing. I hadn't RSVP'd, for instance, to the Gillette luncheon, but he said, "Oh, you have to go to that, and if they don't have any seats left when you get there, tell them that I said that you should go in." And so I got there, and they said, "We don't have any seats left." And I said, "Oh, Russ Merritt told me I was supposed to be here." And they said, "I think we can find a seat for you." And the rest is history. So I'm
That's
deeply
so
into
Russ.
this stuff.
So the moral of the story to anyone listening is when you show up to the Gillette luncheon, use Russ Merritt's name. Not for free admission, but for admission.
Yes, a simple admission. Yeah. No
Moral
other favor.
is always find an irregular to adopt you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And of course the piece that Russ wrote, he presented, and that was edited together in the book here. There are some wonderful images, stills, and illustrations that just so richly accompany his piece there. That alone, I think, is worth the price of admission on the book there.
Sherlock Holmes movies and TV programs. There are thousands of hours. How will you ever have time to see them all? Now there's an answer. Every Sherlock Holmes video has been optimized, compressed, and multiplexed so you can see them all at the same time. Enjoy every version of Hound of the Baskervilles at once.
Man's or a woman's? Footprints of a gigantic hound. Footprints of a gigantic hound.
With new high-definition soundtracks for every Silent Holmes film ever made. It's the only streaming video service that delivers the 3 C's. Collapsing, cortex, cacophony. So fire up your viewing experience with Firehose Streaming. It's like a Reichenbach waterfall for your eyes today.
We had a number of other people, though, who I think that even if they were not necessarily on a Sherlockian radar, they certainly ought to have been people along the lines of John Landis, who sat there on the stage interviewing Nicholas Meyer, who is not only the author of the 7% Solution, but is the director of The Wrath of Khan. So, there are a lot of very nerdy elements that come into play there for fan appreciation and appreciation of just science fiction film and of John Landis was responsible for how many films?
Well, we all know Nick Meyer and his connection with the Sherlockian movement, but why was John Landis chosen as the individual to interview him? Did he have some kind of Sherlockian connection?
I think it's very likely that it's because his wife was also on the program.
Yes.
And this is, hers was the only talk that was at the conference.
That was not in the book.
It was not included in the book.
Oh, no.
Because, we got in touch with her. I mean, as we probably will say more than once again, is that the amount of time that lapsed between the conference and when the book project kind of ended up in our hands meant that we really had a lot of piecing back together to do to even get all the contacts back together to say, you know, please tell me you still have some copy. You know, in 2.5 years, people get new computers and the documents get lost. We were really...
It was archaeological shit, dude.
It really was. It was a massive project just to reconstruct the conference itself, you know, right, to get back to level ground before we got to start building a book out of it. And we were really lucky that most of the people were really available and still had the material that they used. There were some who didn't, but we had the entire conference on audio, for instance, and I spent an awful lot of time transcribing. And some people said, you know, I didn't write my talk. I spoke extemporaneously. And I said, well, if I transcribe your talk and send it to you, would you?
And you approve it.
You approve it. And we had a couple people who did that. But the only person who said, not only do I not have a talk to give you, but I don't even have time to read something you sent me, was Deborah Nadoolman-Landis. And she is an extremely busy person.
She costumed Indiana Jones, for the love of God.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, if that's the case, then she should be an expert at this archaeological thing, one would think.
Right. But
not on her own behalf.
Well,
only on
I know.
the paid behalf of other projects. So
Deborah Nadoolman-Landis, she worked on a number of films in recent Hollywood history from the 70s to 80s as a costume designer. She's got her MFA in costume design.
She did an amazing presentation for us.
So she's responsible for icons of the screen, things that we know, like Indiana Jones's fedora.
His hat.
Michael Jackson's red jacket in Thriller. The college sweatshirt worn by Bluto in an Animal House. I mean, this is American pop culture. So turn our thoughts to Sherlock Holmes. Where did we get her costume designer insights about Sherlock Holmes? What did she have to say?
Well, her talk was less about Sherlock Holmes specifically than about the function of costume in general, and we were sort of allowed to extrapolate from that. She spoke about the period, more or less, and largely she was working on a thesis which she's expressed elsewhere if you read articles that she's written, and if you read up on anybody who writes on costume design and film theory. You'll get similar kinds of expressions, but her thesis is more or less that it's really important to recognize that the purpose of costume is not to factually recreate an authentic time period, but that costume is a function of the narrative. And so as a viewer, your goal when you look at costume, if you're trying to see what that is, we very much get caught up in the idea of period fidelity, and certainly as Sherlockians, you know, meticulously and authentically recreating the past is something that a lot of Sherlockians are very invested in. And she was working on the idea that maybe that's actually not always the point. And it's one thing to say, oh, actually, if it's set in, 1890, then this is the kind of bustle they were wearing, and they're wearing the wrong kind of bustle, or that particular pattern wasn't popular, or that color wasn't available, or whatever it happens to be. And instead of doing that, looking at it to say, actually, what narrative function is this costume serving? What do we learn about the characters based on that hat? So when you see Sherlock Holmes in Murder by Decree wearing his freaking deerstalker to the opera, oh my God, why is this happening to me again?
I'll be angry about it forever.
You have to stop and go, well, okay, so that's not authentic. And maybe we should, instead of getting pissed off about it, the question is,
we should think that's Batman wearing Batman's ears.
Right, exactly. What does that actually accomplish? Well, it's his superhero outfit. He's about to start a case, and he's transformed into his superhero persona, and we know he's Sherlock Holmes again, and that's a signifier. So that was largely what her talk was about.
She was talking about iconography and about symbolism and about just cultural resonance. If you use a piece of costuming that is going to speak to people, maybe it's not even the deerstalker, maybe it's historical fiction and the cape-backed greatcoat, and it's the alienist cover walking away of that man walking away in this coat. And that was the historical fiction cover for that long. Maybe costuming to a certain extent, when she was talking about it in Sherlockian terms, was just saying, these are ways that you can draw broad lines in order to communicate to people quite quickly who they're dealing with, why they're dealing with them, and who they're rooting for.
Right.
Got it. Well, I'm still rooting for Robert Downey Jr. to wear a friggin' tie in
oh God,
one of the
but
films.
He's so great.
He wore a cravat in one scene.
Oh, cravat schmavat.
You try the cravat schmervat. That's a
So
there were some. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there were some really iconic filmmakers who were there who might not necessarily be on every Sherlockian's radar, but oh my God, the animators of The Great Mouse Detective.
I was going to ask you about them. Yeah. So what did they have to say?
They had a lot to say.
They were so cute. I just want to squish them both. I really
do too. I do too. Oh, they were great.
The mice or the animators?
They had so much to say about ways in which that film was initially conceived that it did not, in fact, go forward.
Yes.
They wanted it to be initially, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ash, but I think that they were talking about this was sort of a manic Monty Python-esque almost.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, like cracked out mice.
It was going to be weird, weirder than what it turned into, and bear in mind that what it turned into included a clockwork mouse Queen Victoria. So it was weirder than that.
Wow.
It was weirder than the wild, crazy, sort of psyched out, slightly stoned Big Ben gear thing that happens. That was
just slightly stoned, and they were like, "Yeah, we wanted to make it way worse." But hearing them talk about it, it was pretty awesome. It seems like they had just been quite influenced by Eric Idle and John Cleese and people like that who they wanted
were
to
they
turn
Brits
into something kind of subversive.
Were they Brits or Americans?
Americans.
And were they on the Disney team, or were these just okay? Yeah. So these were like Disney,
right?
I'm sorry.
I think they still are. Didn't they say that they worked?
Yeah.
Because when we were contacting them, we had the email address for one, but not the other.
Yeah, and one was at Disney.com.
Yeah, or sorry, the dog. He wouldn't, one of them was bad about getting back with his emails, and we emailed the other one and said, could you remind him that he needs to approve this transcript? And he said, next time you see him, he said, that should be no problem. He just works 2 doors down, so.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. So one of the most hysterical titles or offbeat titles in the volume here is Holmes Superbus, Watson Absurdus.
That's Jerry Kegley's article.
We can all guess which Holmes and Watson that's referring to. What was Jerry trying to get at with respect to Rathbone and Bruce?
Jerry is a lifelong Bruce apologist.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think that Nigel Bruce needs an apologist, but unfortunately, Jerry has proved time and time again that apparently, in fact, he does. So, he is a very staunch advocate of talking about Nigel Bruce in the way that Nigel Bruce's Watson improved the fates of John Watsons everywhere, as opposed to degraded them or denigrated them in any way. You really didn't have a strongly present Watson before Nigel Bruce started appearing alongside Basil Rathbone, and even if he was a bit on the edge of the absurdist side of the spectrum, if
in a lot of buckets.
If there was a bucket, he might step in it. If there was a banana, it's possible he would have a hapless encounter with it.
If there's a bucket, he's gonna end up taking the pants off. I mean, it's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen, but
he was not wallpaper.
Watson was not necessary to the narrative, and we didn't even know that this was slightly untrue until we saw the Gillette film. Because bear in mind, again, Kegley's presentation about Nigel Bruce's Watson predated us having seen the actual William Gillette film. Mm-hmm. And then I can remember when we all did see the William Gillette film that the Watson actually turned out to be kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we were like, oh, this is a really interesting Watson. Like, this Watson, sure, he just lounges around in Holmes's like office for like periods of time, picking up paperweights and whatnot. But like, he's there. And Jerry has a really passionate love of not only the Basil Rathbone incarnation of Sherlock Holmes, but specifically of Nigel Bruce as being a very emotionally resonant touchstone of a Watson that you can relate to when Rathbone is being suave and when Rathbone is being hyper intellectual and all of these other things that Sherlock Holmes is. So that, I think, was the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's well done. Well done.
He is the best advocate for the Nigel Bruce Watson, I think, that I've ever heard speak. And he always, when he does talk about it, speaks very passionately on the subject. And then I always end up agreeing with him. Even though some of those films are terrible. And Basil Rathbone sometimes has Flock of Seagulls hair. But,
we don't talk about the hair.
Bad hair Basil. That's a thing.
Yes.
That's a whole thing. So, Ashley, I'm particularly interested in your professional bona fides as it comes to this particular volume and this particular conference. How does one go about, basically doing pop culture and Sherlock Holmes for a living?
Jealous?
Yeah, hell yeah.
More or less, you just have to, it's a little bit luck about where you end up, but it's also a blind refusal to see facts in the face, as General Melcher would say, when all else fails, a blind refusal to look facts in the face will see us through. I was doing a master's degree in literature, and this followed getting a bachelor's degree in radio, TV, film. And all the time I was writing about radio, TV, film theory, I kept trying to write about books. And while I was doing my master's degree, every time I was supposed to be writing about books, I kept trying to write about movies and TV. So I decided to do my master's thesis on a combination of the things. And I was quite interested in the idea of remediation, cultural remediation. So, an idea that kind of sees iterations over and over again and how they change in relation to who we are as a society. And it seemed to me like Sherlock Holmes was what I called at the time a cultural constant. So you could basically dip in anywhere in the entire 20th century and you could find an iteration of Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And based on how that portrayal, obviously this is, it's going to be a little bit anecdotal because there are all sorts of other reasons why something might change. Portrayals might change, aspects of the stories might change, but you could dip in anywhere and you could get something of a picture of what society looks like based on what its Sherlock Holmes is. And what I decided to do was, for my master's thesis, was put a lot of Hounds of the Baskervilles next to each other, and particularly look at Watson's role evolving. And I actually started with Nigel Bruce's Watson, because he was the first Watson who had billing in the opening credits. And go all the way through what was at that time the most recent Hound of the Baskervilles version, which was Richard Roxburgh's film from 2002. Lyndsay hates it and I love it. But it bore out my thesis, which is that Watson was on this kind of trajectory that was getting more and more heroic as filmmakers kept trying to figure out what he was supposed to be doing within the narrative, what his function was. And there was an inverse trajectory that Holmes had to follow, because as Watson becomes more heroic, Holmes becomes less of a paragon, and you end up with what we have now, which is more or less a kind of antisocial Holmes and a badass hero Watson. And I liked that so much. All of my colleagues expected, or all of my colleagues, as they were going through their master's theses, developed a greater and greater distaste for their subject, so that when they actually defended their theses and got their degrees, absolutely never wanted to see anything like their material ever again. And if you showed it to them, they would just spontaneously vomit. Like, it was just that level of, I've been invested in this for so long, I hate it. And I was the opposite. I loved it so much. I kept expecting to come to some sort of a wall, and I never did. So I decided to carry on and do a PhD in that. And kind of fortuitously, we had a member of faculty where I got my master's degree, who was also a member of an association, which, as you mentioned, I'm a member of now, the Association of Adaptation Studies, which is UK based. And he said, well, if you want to do adaptation studies and you want to continue doing this research, which I think you should, you need to go to this university in Leicester in England, because they have a center for the study of this. So I immediately booked a flight, because why wouldn't I take up the opportunity to go to England? What? England? Throw me into that briar patch. So I made an appointment with the head of the center. She really liked my ideas, which of course looked nothing at all like what my dissertation ended up being, because in fact it's hysterically bad when you go back and look at your doctoral proposal and your actual dissertation. It's just laughable. But once you get into doing it at the doctoral level, you are writing conference papers and you're publishing articles. And the more I published, the more there was to say, the more interest people had in my work. And it's gotten to the point where I now have experience, presenting papers on Sherlock Holmes across many nations and 3 separate continents, as it were. So, the more I write, the more people want me to write.
That's amazing.
And long-winded.
Oh, it's almost like you're running your own little Baker Street Journal.
It feels like that sometimes.
But very much across various publication venues and across different opportunities where different sorts of people would get the opportunity to hear about it. So so that's kind of a fun thing too.
That's marvelous.
And I'm very grateful that she was my colleague on this project, because we definitely, as we were sort of digging back into, well, what was this conference? What should the book version of this conference be? Can we even recreate this conference? No. How do we remake it in something that would be true to the spirit of it? And it was a really fantastic opportunity for me to learn from Ashley.
So thinking about the conference itself, the papers, the presentations, the interviews, the screenings, for each of you, what was the most memorable part of that weekend?
Oh no. Do we have to tell this story?
You do now.
Can we?
No, not that story. We're not telling that.
Oh, no. That's the one I want you to tell.
No. You don't want us to tell that
I'll take
story.
it out in post.
Not that one. I'm going to go with the second most memorable.
We'll tell you.
We'll tell you.
You already know it, I think.
Yeah, but not your listeners. They don't need to hear that. Never meet your heroes. Anyhow.
Don't meet your heroes.
Don't meet. I love going to any Sherlockian event. I mean, that's a period. I like going to any Sherlockian event. But I love particularly the out-of-the-way events that have a smaller attendance, because you get to spend more personal time with people who, for instance, at the birthday weekend are running all over Hell's Half Acre, eating giant meals and not having a lot of time, which is why my favorite part of the BSI weekend is always after all the events are over and we're sitting with, 8 people in O'Looney's, just shooting the breeze and being ridiculous and being friends. But at this event, I got the chance to spend a little bit more time with some people that I haven't otherwise got to spend a lot of time with. So, for instance, I got to sit and have dinner with Les Klinger, and I love Les. And that's really the only opportunity I've ever had to sit down and have extended conversations with Les, because he's busy and important and everyone wants his attention. And of course they do. So that's probably what's most memorable about it for me. It's not even the program content, because we've been up to our elbows in the program content doing the book for so long that what stands to me now is actually the people behind
personal interactions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I had a similar experience because I always have a strong distinction that I try to draw between my previous life as a professional actor and public speaking, because they're not the same thing. And a lot of people, are very willing to come up and say to me, "Oh, well, you used to be an actor, so public speaking must be really easy." And I'm like, no, is the idea of being naked on stage easy to you? because when you're an actor, you are performing the composite that you have created of a person who is not you, who is very specifically not you. You are somebody else on stage. And this was one of the first large format Sherlockian. I don't know. I had done Bennington previous to that, and Bennington was great. I really enjoyed the talk that I gave in Bennington, but this was one of the definitely biggest presentations that I had done for the Irregulars previously, and I was terrified. And it ended up just being really lovely to be in a room full of people who are all interested in the same thing that you're interested in. And just because of the fact that I really look at public speaking as something much more difficult than playing a role on stage, that didn't mean that in that situation I needed to be terrified of it, because I had done my research and I had put myself together, and everybody was really receptive, and I got out of it alive. And I got to listen to a lot more people who were much more interesting. So, I appreciated that aspect of it. And it is great to be able to go to a conference where not everybody is splintering off into, there's so much to do during the BSI weekend. It just is endless. And I think eventually, you just want to change your socks, at some point. But at some of, like Ashley was just saying, the smaller Sherlockian conferences that are a little bit more specialized, it becomes really cool that you can have these personal conversations with people. Yeah. And that was lovely. I got to hang out with Curtis Armstrong a little bit more than I normally get to hang out with Curtis.
Never anything wrong with that.
And have interaction with Curtis for the first time properly at that conference too, and now we're buds.
Right. But it's rewarding to be able to be around some of those, folks. I mean, I always feel honored when I get to be around Scott Monty and he's not rushing off to tweet something.
Not this year. Oh
yeah. You've been told.
I think we've run the gamut here on the book, and there's much more in between the covers of Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen. Pick up your copy at bakerstreetjournal.com. It's available there for $29.95 plus shipping in the U.S. You'll probably want to pick up plenty of copies because the holidays are coming up, and you'll want to give these to Sherlockians everywhere. Going back to the beginning of the book here, I want to wrap up. This seems kind of counterintuitive, but I wanted to wrap up with what I thought was it was both the shortest and probably the most profound statement in the book. And that is the introduction. The introduction, for those of you that don't yet have a copy of the book, dedication, not introduction, dedication, is to the memory of the late Sir Christopher Lee, whose thread in the Sherlockian tapestry was so rich and so varied. Tell us about that.
We were in the midst of the sort of deepest and hardest part of editing the book together, where we were both sort of tearing our hair out and trying to get this done and make it as perfect as we knew we could make it, or as close to perfect as we knew we could make it. And that's when...
But simultaneously on the phone with each other at 4 a.m,
right.
Being like, oh my God, you totally caught that apostrophe. Yes. Yes. I mean, like, cause we were our own copy editors as well as our own editors. So double blind and all of this stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. So
we were in the long, dark tea time of the soul.
Yes. Yes. We were deep in the slough of despond, as it were. And, that was when Sir Christopher Lee passed away. And we just thought that it was fitting, that somebody who, there aren't any chapters on Christopher Lee in the book. Nobody gave a talk on Christopher Lee and Sherlock Holmes. But you're going to find him all over the place. His fingerprints are everywhere, right? He's Henry Baskerville, and he's Mycroft Holmes, and he's Sherlock Holmes. He's all over, and you just think, isn't that so? We just felt he was so indicative of Sherlock Holmes, and that you could find him hiding out in the nooks and crannies.
I hear of Christopher Lee everywhere.
I hear of Christopher Lee everywhere. He's an unsung hero of Sherlock Holmes, and even though the book couldn't contain every piece of information about every adaptation, we wanted to make sure that we paid tribute to the kind of complexity and depth of this subject, and he kind of represents that for us. So I texted Lyndsay. I said, "Can we please dedicate the book to Christopher Lee?" And her response was, "Absolutely, that's happening." So that went
instant yes, and no regrets, because that is somebody who is woven into the tapestry of Sherlockiana irrevocably.
Yeah.
And if he had not had a tribute in that volume, then I think that despite the fact that 2.5 years previous, he might not have been, necessarily as immediately on the radar of things that we needed to, actors and incarnations that we needed to talk about right then, it would have just been, it would have been wrong not to include him in that volume.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm waiting for Russ Merritt to find a lost Sherlock Holmes film where Sir Christopher Lee actually played Mrs. Hudson.
Oh, I'm sure he can.
Probably out
You've
there.
already seen that film, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is.
Oh, you're right. That's already in existence. Thank you, Ashley.
Nice.
There's also that one where he played Toby, but
we don't talk about that one. That's a terrible film.
Yeah.
It wasn't his best role. It wasn't his best work.
No.
All right.
It was bad wig banking. I don't think.
Thank you both for joining us and sharing your zany journey to publication on this fine book from 2012 to present. It was worth the wait. That's all I can say.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It was our pleasure.
Lyndsay, where can people find you online?
They can find me at Lyndsay Faye on Twitter, and at author Lyndsay Faye on Facebook, and at lyndsayfaye.com. And they can also find, I believe, Ashley and I in the dealer's room this coming BSI weekend for the remaining 50% of the copies that are left of Behind the Canonical Screen.
Excellent.
Because we will scribble on anything you put in front of us.
I will remember that. Ashley, where can people find you online?
You can find me at Sherlock PhD on Twitter. And that's it, because I'm not a famous fancy author. That's for me.
Hey, that's enough. And hey, who else can claim Sherlock PhD on Twitter anyway?
Well, quite. I was a little surprised it didn't, that the handle hadn't already been taken when I went for it.
Excellent. Well, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, what a delightful interview with two very delightful Sherlockians. You know, I have a number of opportunities to come across people that are passionate about this hobby, passionate about the work that they do in their, well, shall we call it, real lives. And it's just wonderful to see where there is an intersection of the two. Oftentimes it's quite rare to see something like this. And when someone can really hit upon it, like Lyndsay and Ashley both have done, and take their hobby, take their passion, and funnel that into what they do for a living, I think it's absolutely inspiring to the rest of us, and it makes us cheer for them all the more. We love to have ringside seats by people who enjoy what they're doing and share that joy with us. So I hope we get many more opportunities to do the same with Ashley, Lyndsay, and other talented Sherlockians just like them. As any astute listener may discern, pay attention now, we're talking about you. The Baker Street Irregulars Press is really about more than just the Baker Street Journal. Yes, we natter on about
the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946.
But there's really more to the BSI Press than just the journal. Since Edgar W. Smith's time in the 1940s and 1950s, the BSI has been producing scholarly volumes that dive deeper than any single issue of the BSJ. In early editions edited by Edgar, we have Baker Street and Beyond, introducing Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes, The Writings of John H. Watson, M.D. In those days, Irregulars ventured out only for the annual BSI dinner and weekend. But in the last decade, the BSI has hosted a series of conferences where scholars and devotees have shared papers and presentations to those in attendance. And as you've heard, those who were not in attendance now have the opportunity to read those papers, collected in book form. These include Murderland, from the Valley of Fear expedition to Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania in 2004. A Tangled Skein, from the Study in Scarlet expedition to Salt Lake City, Utah in 2008. And now, Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen from the Los Angeles expedition in 2012. Relive the adventures that others took on your behalf and soak in the wonders of their scholarship. They did the hard work. Now you get to benefit from it. All of these and more are available at BakerStreetJournal.com. Buy your copy today. Well, if you've enjoyed this show, please take the time to get in touch with us. Leave us a message, if you will. We'll take it in any format. It used to be that we would accept it written on the back of a $20 bill, but I think that's been phased out now. We've tried coconuts, we've tried carrier pigeons, but you know, the thing that still works time and again is good old email. Email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. Leave a comment on the show notes. This is episode 109. You can find it via the short URL, ihose.co/ihose109, all lowercase, ihose.co/ihose109. You can call us at 774-221-7323. That's 774-221-READ. You can also find us as I Hear of Sherlock on all of the major social networks. Well, it's been a pleasure, and until next time, this is Scott Monty.
And I'm Bert Wolder.
And we bid you the game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck,
And believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.